Um, I think we can start and then people will start joining in. I would like to thank everyone for attending the session. My name is Yasser Khaldi and I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Cambridge in my last year. And today I'll be presenting my research on part of my research, which is on sustainable energy transition of local government units in Palestine, which is part of a great initiative by Cambridge Zero, who are doing the climate change initiative. Usually it's a huge event now due to the situation, it's entirely online, but hopefully you'll benefit from the experience. I would like to say that this research is actually part of the paper that I'm currently working on with my supervisor, Dr. MENA, and another doctor, Dr. Margaret from the University of Edinburgh. And I would like to extend the acknowledgement to many Palestinian institutions who actually helped in providing the data, interviews, and really just supporting the whole research. Yes, so I'll start by talking a little bit about the energy transition and energy systems. And as you know, due to climate change, now energy systems are shifting from fossil fuel-based systems into a more clean and renewable-based system. So this obviously needs a transition approach. And in this research, we are using transition management because it's an effective way to conceptualize this long-term techno-economic and social change. However, we are also joining the scholars who are saying that transition practice should actually include justice-related concepts. And you can see here from the right map that the main sources of electricity that we get in Palestine depends mainly in imports. So we get 90% plus electricity from IEC, which is the Israeli electricity company, provides for the West Bank and Gaza, in addition to few percentages from Jordan and Egypt. The only generation, minor generation that we have exist in Gaza Strip, and it's working at probably less than 25% capacity because of the blockade. Now, the good thing is that renewable energy provided Palestinians the chance to finally generate their own energy using natural resources, such as wind and solar. In 2012, and now updated in 2020, the Energy Authority, PENRA, provided or established a national target. So this national target actually will provide 20% from our needs by 2030 from solar energy. And as you can see, the timeline shows the policies and regulations that is supporting this. However, unfortunately, this also created a new cycle of injustice, but this time from internal Palestinian institutions, central institutions toward the local authorities. So to understand the picture more, if you can see the map on the right, you'll see that in the West Bank, in such a small space, we have 5 distribution companies, and they are unable to connect because of Israeli geopolitical restrictions. And at the same time, these 5 distribution companies represent 70% of the electricity market in Palestine. However, we have also 130 local authorities who represent 30% of the market, and they distribute their electricity themselves. So they are unregulated and they are considered illegal by the law. And this is the research focus because we believe that there's a gap between the national and local level. So the problem, as you can see, is that these energy authorities are entirely dependent on Israel, meaning they are energy insecure, they have low quality grids, they refuse to join distribution companies because they benefit from the revenues, and they have inconsistent payments. So this is an example. Qalqilia city is one of the big marginalized communities, which has 50,000 plus inhabitants. They suffer from the circulation as you can see in the black line in the map, of the separation wall, which means it is very difficult to strategically plan and think about interconnectivity and other issues. So again, the energy sector institutional setup is highly complex. You have generation from these sources, and they provide the electricity towards the Palestinian Electricity Transmission Company, which is regulated on the top by the Energy Authority, PENRA, and Regulation Council, PERC. Then they distribute electricity to distribution companies and then end users. And at the same time, you have 130 self-distribution LGUs. So it's complicated, but there is a solution that I'll present in a little bit. So in this research, we are depending on the strategic level. Transition management actually looks at 3 levels: strategic, which is where envisioning and long-term takes place, and then tactical level, where building the agenda, negotiations, and mobilizing actors, and then the operational level, which is where experiments, projects, and innovation takes place. At the same time, we have energy justice, which actually compensate for the social aspect. So it looks at the distributional justice, which is basically who is benefiting from energy justice and how decision-making approach can be taken in order to be inclusive. So this is just an analytical framework that I hope that you keep in mind while doing the presentations. Now, we distributed the surveys to more than 150 local authorities. Just basically, the first survey was to know what is their role in the energy sector. And then we did another long survey to target 40 local authorities to collect more technical data. And then we also used a mixed method of interviews and roundtable discussions just to know what is the narratives of these institutions, what is the decision-making process, and what is the institutional capacities. So basically what numbers cannot tell us. And from 130 local authorities, we chose about 15 local authorities to focus on them. Now, the results section will be divided into 3 sections: strategic, which is how the energy production of injustice takes place against local authorities, then what are the ways and paths we can reduce this justice, and whether local authorities can participate in building solar power plants or not. So any electricity system is composed of 3 main parts: generation, which is basically generating electricity, then transmission over long distances to cities and towns, and then local distribution to end users. So to see, in Palestine, we're trying to build this centralized model, but obviously it's not working, the research says, because we cannot build new generation capacities, for instance, from gas because of restrictions due to imports. At the same time, Palestine is not able to connect all communities using a transmission backbone because communities are separated by Area C, which is, as you know, under Israeli security and civil administration. And at the same time, we have many distribution agencies and we're not able to unify them. So basically, transition management tell us that in conflict contexts, having a centralized system is actually, or maybe, marginalizing communities. So the question becomes, what ways, what is the agenda, the new agenda that we can take to actually reduce the marginalization? Again, as we said, we have a 300 megawatt target to reach from solar energy. 80% from that is solar energy, but we don't have a spatial map. Basically, we don't have locations of these 80% solar in the future. And research says because there's a lack of strong relationship between the national and local level. This is actually driving investors away, and at the same time, less and less people are benefiting. But there is an important concept that was developed by the Palestinian Economic Institute, MAS, and it's the case for regionalization. So because a central approach is actually disrupted by Israeli restrictions, we should think differently and have a different ideology of regionalization and decentralized development, because it actually it is projected to suit Palestinian planning. So if you see on the left bottom, this is a conventional way of generating and connecting all communities, which is obviously not working in Palestine. And then you have another model, which is dependent on regionalization on the energy sector, which is having actually clusters of self-dependent, but also connected to the grid. And this is projected to grant more resilience to marginalized communities instead of just connecting them. Now, this solution is called microgrids, and it's a well-established technology where actually local authorities can generate their electricity and distribute it locally and where needed. So if you see on the map on the right bottom, you see number 5, this is the community that is establishing a microgrid, and it's taking its electricity needs from solar, and it has storage, which is a new promising technology to store electricity for stability and reliability. And as you can see, if there is a national grid, it can connect it. If not, it can be self-reliant. So this is an important quote that I personally admire from a research perspective. It says, whatever solution that you do, you will your aspiration will be limited and remain undermined because of the Israeli electricity company control. The only way I see out of this situation is becoming independent. This wasn't a solution in the past, but now a microgrid and storage technologies combined with solar PV making it happen. So basically, we need to adapt to what is happening and to have a structural as well changes on the way we generate electricity. Now, we need to move to the operational level. Can local authorities build solar power plants, which is the main building block of a microgrid? This is what we will answer now. We did a grid capacity assessment for 15 local authorities, and basically just to see whether the grid can withstand solar energy or not. Because as you know, these grids are old and they need maintenance. And what we found is that from 15 LGUs, we can actually, or these 15 LGUs can actually take 20 to 30% consumption from renewables. So if you see, the blue curve shows one of the town's consumption, and the orange curve shows the potential generation from solar. So obviously, there is the grid at local level can actually take solar. What about lands? We found average available land of 14.5 dunum, which is in Palestine can produce up to 1.3 megawatt stations. So there is enough land, and the civil works is estimated to be about 2% from the project cost, which is reasonably feasible. So the grid can withstand and lands are available. We also did a conceptual design for 15 local authorities, and we found that it is feasible in terms of closeness to the community and feasible in terms of establishing an interconnection line between the station and the community. Now, what about, should local authorities own it or go into partnership? Now, obviously, this is what we expected that, but 80% of local authorities stated they want to own and operate solar stations. But when we assessed their technical capabilities, we found that only 2 out of 15 local authorities can do that. So we recommend that they go into collaboration with the private sector. And luckily, we have 60% who are willing to collaborate with the private sector. We also assessed what is their payment ratio for electricity bills. And as you can see, in 2019, it is 86%, so it's reasonable. So this is sample showing their payment ratio. And then you can see we can choose local authorities who pay well and then support them to go into a partnership with LGUs. Right. Let me know if you have any questions in the chat section, and I'll certainly answer them at the end. I just have a couple more slides, and then I'll give you the floor. So the partnership model will obviously depend on having a donor community or institutional support to local authorities who will provide them technical and infrastructure support. This will enable them to establish private-public partnerships with investors. And then after assessing the situation, the research recommends establishing a project company between the local authority and the private sector, because this way, central authorities such as PENRA, the Ministry of Local Governance and Ministry of Finance can monitor this. This model, by the way, is currently developed with UNDP and their program. And this is the various contracts that should be established. So basically to build the station and to assign a focal point for the operation and maintenance, which is something that is often neglected in many developing countries such as Palestine. Right, moving on to the next slide. In terms of financial feasibility, local authorities would have to lease their land and purchase electricity from investors for 15% less. This is one model. And you will see that an internal rate for solar stations at the local level is between 10 to 15%, which is an excellent rate of investment in Palestine. So now, what other benefits local authorities can give us if we engage them in this transition is that they are effective in connecting the various multi-level political levels. So local authorities actually bring the attention of international agencies, and at the same time can support regional development and national strategies to be implemented. So, but what can we do about it? Research says that we have to support them in three ways. So provide technical assistance by training the staff and giving them sustainable energy action plans, then enhancing the grid, and then supporting them with the overall prerequisites of solar. Now, I don't want to go into details because I'm running out of time, but this is one of the instruments that it's actually taken from UNDP Global De-Risking Intervention. It's basically because local authorities are perceived to have higher risks, we need to actually put what are the interventions to reduce this risk. And then I'll share this slide later on so you can go into the detail. But for every risk category, there is an intervention that can be done. And this is, of course, compiled from interviews. So it's not like a forecast. It's actually done in the market. But the contribution here is just putting them as a one potential policy instrument tool that the government can adopt. Moving on to the conclusion, we need policies to avoid excessive centralization, especially in technical aspects, because local and regional generation is beneficial in terms of accessibility for marginalized communities and as well affordability. At the same time, local authorities need to reinvest and reinvent themselves because they have resources, but the local national level, they don't know about it. So they have to find new ways and channels to actually show this. And of course, they need to do de-risking interventions to reduce and encourage investment. On the conceptual side, we saw that transition management level is a techno-economic perspective. It was very beneficial to conceptualize the whole thing, but it needs energy justice concepts to make sure that it's not only sustainable, but also just. I would like to stop here and thank you for your good listening. And I would like to say that this presentation is recorded and it will be uploaded in Cambridge Zero YouTube channel. And yeah, thank you very much. And I would like to take your questions if you have any. Right, I'll check the chat section just in case there's questions over there. Right. I would be happy to take any questions even by email, which I'll even post. Thank you everyone for the session. I hope you benefited. And I would like to also, I mean, again, extend the acknowledgement to many.
I have a question, Yasser, if I may.
Yeah. Yes, please.
This is Laith Kassis. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Yeah. Hi.
From what I've understood, that I mean, the model of decentralization of supply of power to different geographic areas within the context of Palestinian territories these days is the way forward. Now, with how the sustainability element can work towards that as well, this is something that I would like to have your point of view on. You know, where can, even if we start investing in decentralization in these local farms, right? But is that, how does the sustainability issue of growth, continuous growth, population growth, how would that lead us going forward? What's your take on that?
Yeah, thank you. Like, that's an excellent question, and I'm glad to see you here as well. So the point of establishing a microgrid doesn't actually, I would say, contradict having a centralized system. So we need to have two strands. So for instance, in the UK, where I study and also worked, you see that the government is working on having connectivity between all communities, but at the same time having resiliency in terms of decentralization for communities that are hard to reach or maybe too expensive to connect them. So in terms of fiscal sustainability, it's definitely a moving or it's definitely a good solution. However, in terms of actually population growth, these stations actually last for about 25 and sometimes even 30 years. So the way that is built, it's not only like one project, it's a system that is accumulated. So basically you start by building various I would say, solar stations, which reduce the cost and the environmental harm. And then you add storage capacities to convert also usage from day to night as well. Then you connect them. So this is a long process, might take 1 decade or 2 decades, depending on the community. So in the meanwhile, there is always projections that are done and readings that are done to make sure that this is happening and accounting for the urban growth. Now, sometimes you will see that a local authority or a municipality want to go 100% solar or 100% renewable from different sources, but they are unable to do this. And this is where the issue of connectivity is important. For instance, I would say Ya'bad in the north of West Bank, they have vast amount of land, but at the same time, the grid is saturated from solar. So now they are looking ways with the government and with other neighboring, I would say, communities to give them solar. So it's not always about generation, but sometimes about connectivity. And the third thing is we don't have much solutions. So now, obviously, some communities receive electricity, but in an unregulated way, and sometimes poor frequent cuts. So this is the way forward. And luckily, technology advancements and trends are actually supporting this. Now, although this research was only about, this presentation was only about my research, but now I'm working with an international agency and as well some local development companies to actually find bringing this solution to life in the near future, upcoming, hopefully, a couple of years.
Thank you, Yasser.
Yes.
I think you have a few questions on the chat screen if you want to take a look at those.
Yes, 1 second. Right. So I saw someone is asking about the plans for the Ministry of Authority until 2030. Of course, I'll go back to this slide because So this is the National Renewable Energy Strategy. It is the curve is actually summarizing what is going to happen. You'll see that 80% is dependent on solar, and then the rest is dependent on other forms such as wind, biogas, and so on. And the reason why you'll see different versions is because in Palestine, land is actually it's the heart of the conflict. So in area A and B, which is where Palestinians live and it's under the security and administration of Palestine, we can build solar stations, but at the same time, it is land used for urban growth. So, and then you have area C, which is unfortunately with the Israeli administration. And it's not necessarily, sometimes Palestinians, when they want to build solar stations, they cannot obtain permits. So that's why you'll see a range between 300 to 500 megawatts. And of course, I hope to see more wind energy in the future, but it's a little bit political, I would say. So solar now is actually gaining ground, and it is actually being built, I would say, keeping up the pace and being built in many locations across the town. Yeah. Right. So,
Yes, sir. With a quick question here again about the wind energy. I mean, I sometimes hear that there is not enough wind speed in Palestine that make it economical for us to leverage and harvest wind. But I don't know about the technology side aspects. Have that improved where we can start harvesting
yeah.
wind when the wind speeds here are not that great?
Yeah, I mean, it's not entirely true because we actually, I mean, the government with international experts actually developed a solar atlas and wind atlas. And this atlas actually highlights. I mean, I wish I have it now. I mean, it's somewhere in my computer, but it actually highlights the spots where it's ideal in Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza, to actually put these stations. And there is actually one proposal that was actually developed and designed, and they even reached to the procurement stage. But because the technology now of wind farms goes up to sometimes 120 meters, from 80 to 180 meters, 20 meters. So this is actually causing security issues from the Israeli side. So technically, definitely it's viable, but obviously for a country like Palestine that receives 300,000 sunlight hours per year, it's obviously more, I would say, wise at this stage to catch up with solar development. So yeah, this
All
is
right.
it's not popular.
My final question, and I apologize for taking
Sure, sure.
time.
Go ahead. Thank you.
Now, you mentioned something that I subscribe with, like land is a scarce resource, and if we put these photovoltaic, uh, you know, over land mass, how do you think we should really leverage rooftops instead of just continuously making farms over land mass
Yeah.
versus start leveraging whatever rooftops we have?
Yeah, no, that's actually an excellent question. Out of because I cannot share all the data, but I'll tell you a little bit of examples. So, for instance, in Qalqilia, the example that I proposed, they don't have land obviously because they are surrounded by the wall. But we developed, or we are developing, a solution for them that would actually provide them megawatt scale on rooftop and on top of parkings. Masader here, the Palestinian, one of Palestinian investment fund companies, they actually have a program to do 35 megawatts from solar energy on top of schools. So we actually have two strands. Obviously, rooftop systems are essential and they are good for accessibility, but at the same time, we need to harvest the land carefully, of course, because of course we need to choose lands that are not, in need for urban development or of high agricultural value. We are trying actually to do a map to highlight all of these locations. It's a bit difficult, here in Palestine, land information is very private. So yeah, I hope this answered your question. So yeah, we have both.
That's good. Yeah. Thank you very much again, Yasser.
Of course.
Lovely presentation, and we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much. Yes, if we don't have any questions, I'll just talk about the future of this research. So it's definitely not an individual effort. Lots of institutions.
Yes, sir.
Yes. Hi.
Hi, this is Hossam from UNDP. Just a comment, if you allow me.
Of course.
Well, thank you very much for this impressive presentation. I think from our side as UNDP, we are so happy to work with you in this survey and to take this forward on the implementation phase next year. Um, Sustainability is critical, and this is we are facing this in all utilities that we are supporting, either distribution companies or local municipalities, and we are tackling this at technical, operational, and regulatory stage. There are also gaps in the regulation need to be discussed and addressed with BERT. There are also capacity building need to be implemented with municipalities. This is why UNGP is looking in all these issues together under de-risking program. Second point, we also consolidating communities, because the trend here that everyone want to own and run solar facility. Ownership is very high in the Palestinian culture, but we also looking for where we can consolidate five, seven communities together under one umbrella. So we are tackling that matter as well to ensure well capacity is there. So thank you very much. I just want to reflect again on the sustainability is a determinant factor in the what we do here. Back to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Hussam, for this. Yeah, it's actually very two good points about the regulation aspect, and as well the future and position of having local authorities as not only receivers or only owners, but maybe putting them in partnership to benefit from the existing potential from the private sector, and as well to gain experience using multiple projects. Yes, thank you for that. Right. We actually have a few more minutes if anyone wants to have a question or a comment. Right. Thank you very much for your attendance. Hopefully this research would be actually put in a form of a policy brief and coordinated to key Palestinian institutions. Yes, thank you very much, and looking forward to having another session in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasser.